Hey, this is Kevin from Kevin's Barbecue Joints, and welcome to episode 8 of Wine and BBQ with Erin Feges from Feges Barbecue in Houston, Texas. In this episode, we talked to Jordan Salcito from Ramona Wine. Sommelier created sparkling wines and spritzes made with the highest quality organic ingredients and sustainable production methods, and they are killer. If you're just listening to this podcast side, I'd jump to the YouTube side just to see in the montage, you see the cans. It's like they come in 4 packs, a 4 pack of cans, and a 4 pack of cans equals 1 1/3 bottles of wine. They come in a number of flavors. So delicious, so refreshing. The packaging is awesome, but Jordan is awesome. And she's talking to us from France. So she's in France, Erin is in Texas and Houston, Texas, and I'm in Los Angeles. So it was kind of cool to do this on multiple time zones. She comes with a pedigree that is just phenomenal. We hear her entire path. And as we hear about her path, she's interesting and engaging. And I think that you'll find it fascinating. And you'll find a lot of things that touch within yourself when you hear about her path. But notably, she was a sommelier at 11 Madison Park in New York. She also ran the beverage program for David Chang's Momofuku Empire. So we get deep into both of those things and those worlds, because those are worlds that not many people have been a part of. So we get to learn what it was like working for both of those, and then how Ramona came about and how difficult it was and all the challenges, but how wonderful it was too, and how these little coincidences or so-called coincidences happened in her life that propelled her and nudged her along the way to where she is today. And in the latter part of the interview, we do talk a lot about the product and what makes the product so special. So I know you're going to enjoy this. You're going to learn a lot. It's a great one. It's really intriguing, really interesting. And at the very end of this, we do talk about some feature stuff, which we do at the end of every interview, about things that are coming up, and especially too, very soon, after Halloween is over, Thanksgiving begins. So if you're interested in the back of your mind of using Feges, either getting from their location or ordering from Gold Belly for them, keep checking their social media. I'll put all that stuff below so that you could jump on board, because the day after Halloween, boom. On the Ramona side, if you're interested in ordering, they're at all the Whole Foods, as well as they have an online shop at drinkramona.com. And we have a special promo code for the show. It's Ramona15, so you could use that at checkout and get 15% off. And on the Ramona website, they also have merch as well as a club. So there's a lot of cool stuff. But thanks so much for listening. Sit back, relax, and enjoy this conversation with Jordan Salcito from Ramona.
You are like part of the OG. We met on like it was like the first month that Ramona existed.
Really?
And
Yeah.
yes. Yeah. So Erin was like a very much an OG Ramona fan and supporter. And we had so many, we talked about like parenthood. We talked about so many things at that beautiful outdoor lunch table.
Was this
I
in,
have
this was in
very, very
Houston?
fond memories. Yes.
This
It
is
was
cool.
at a restaurant called Giacomo's, which has a really great patio in River Oaks and a really good wine list too. And it was, I don't know, maybe a group of 10 women in wine.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
a really good group. It was small, so it was really intimate. And for a lot of us, it was like our first time to meet Jordan and then really get to know you and the wines and just like, I feel like it was a great and excellent opportunity to meet someone in wine that was really kind of on the cusp of doing some really great things, but had also already done some really great things. Like you were definitely already sitting at that table with a great resume and a lot to be proud of and very accomplished, but you certainly were very just genuine and open. And
Thank you for your flexibility that crazy week.
of course,
Thank
we're,
you.
we're very happy to have you on the podcast now.
Yeah, definitely. I was going to crack this open.
I'm
I'm ready to
I
go.
love that. I'm ready to go too.
Should we do
I've got
it
a
all?
wine glass in case
Oh,
I
sorry,
want to
I just
go
did
fancy.
Yeah, same here. Sure. So what city in France are you living in?
I am in Paris right now.
Ah,
And we landed here about 2 weeks ago.
And it's a work vacation family thing, right?
Yes, that's about a year. So I'll be going back and forth, but like the boys are in school here in France. So they just started their first week of French school.
so refreshing. Like it's honestly, like ridiculous. Like, and I'm not just saying that because you're
it's
here.
the best breakfast drink there is.
Yeah, and I'm in, it's so funny because you're in France, and what time is it there?
It's 7:07 p.m. It's a
Yeah.
perfect time.
And it's
But it's
10:07 a.m. here in Los Angeles.
Also a perfect time to be, that's the thing
Yeah.
about Ramona. People are like, why do you like it so much? And I'm like, well, first of all, you have to try it. It's very delicious. But secondly, like, it's great to consume in all sorts of situations, at the beach, at lunch, for breakfast, for dinner. There's no bad time for it. And it kind of always, it just always fits. Plus grapefruit is my favorite citrus flavor. So I thoroughly enjoy it.
And it is remarkable that four cans equal what, it's a bottle and a half of wine?
Yes, a bottle and a third.
A third. Okay. Yeah,
exactly. So 3 cans is the same volume equivalent as a bottle of wine.
Which messes with your head a little bit.
Totally.
I guess
Yeah,
as you've you drink more, you probably messes even more. But it's just hard to conceptualize that would be the potency.
Sometimes I'll get, sometimes I'll get texts from friends and they'll be like, oh my God, this is delicious. But like, how much alcohol is in here? And I'm like, 7%. How many have you had? And they're like, 4. That's a lot.
Right. You're doing good.
Well, good evening to you.
And good morning to you.
Thank you. And good afternoon to you, Erin.
And good afternoon.
Yeah, I love it.
Thank you so much for taking the time. We're extremely excited.
Goodness. Thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm very excited and very honored to be here.
It's episode 8, so we've been pretty consistent. It's pretty amazing. Yeah, it's as I've mentioned before on the show, is once I realized what Erin and Patrick were doing with Spring Branch and having wine pairings, I just knew that this was something I love. Wine and barbecue together, I think it's ideal. And so I broached the concept to Erin, and it worked, and people seem to like it. So it's
like that genius marriage of high-low and with high standards. So it's like the thing that is like high standards, and it doesn't have to be this impossible barrier to entry. Great wine is something that anyone at any point in their journey can appreciate. And yes, there are lots of facts to memorize if you want to go down that rabbit hole, but you could also just enjoy it for the sake of enjoying it, and then do digging down whatever path inspires your curiosity.
That's one of the things too, is it seems intimidating to a lot of people. And I think what you've done too is you've even made it even more accessible, because this is something that people who possibly are scared to drink wine, this tastes delicious. It's just
I normally don't admit this publicly, but my 2-year-old really likes Ramona, and I don't let him have much of it, but I don't let him have much candy, because I'm like, you know what? I don't actually know what's in that, but yeah, okay. Ramona's grapes and it's citrus and it's organic, and we're not adding any weird secret chemicals like Velcorin or things that get added as a preservative and then not listed. And so it's one of those things that I guess like a fun analogy or just a fun factoid is that like moose and deer and animals in the wilderness will eat fermenting grapes or berries or whatever it is. They'll eat fermenting fruit, and then they get like a little bit of a buzz. And so it's sort of like grapes ferment, fruit ferments, and it doesn't have to be. But I'm not advocating for underage drinking. I'm not.
No, that's I'll put a disclaimer. Yeah, there's no Ramona Junior line coming out.
No. Now my 6-year-old's like, when are you making one that I can drink without alcohol? We'll work on that.
Yeah, how about 15 years down the line you could work on it.
Exactly. He's a very good rule follower. He's like, this is not for me. I'm like, great. Like, when I'm 21, I can have this. That sounds perfect.
Yeah, but in France, 18, right?
I think it is. Yeah, it is 18.
17, I don't know.
Exactly. Well, and that was a thing that my parents were always really conscious of, was that they didn't want to make wine taboo. And my dad's father, so my dad's dad died when my dad was 13.
Oh.
And he never, he talks almost never about his own father. And the one memory that he's shared at all is that they used to make wine together in their basement in Waterbury, Connecticut. And so it was, I'm sure, not very good wine. It wasn't about that. It was just sort of, this tradition that had been brought over from my grandfather's community in Italy, and everyone just made wine in the basement and in their Italian American community in Waterbury, Connecticut. And so there was already this connective tissue between wine and other generations that existed since I can remember. And so it was sort of, I think my parents didn't want us to be afraid of wine. Of course, they were not. Yeah, it was just, if they were drinking a bottle, then we could have a sip. And I didn't really enjoy it particularly for most of my life until probably college, but it was never a thing that was off limits. It was like, if you want to try some of this wine, go for it.
That's how my parents were too. And we traveled in Europe a lot when I was younger, and we did a lot of wine. I mean, we really experienced a lot of wine stuff when we were in Europe, and I was always invited to come up and try. And I don't think I really enjoyed it. I was, 13, 14, 15, and then through high school. Wasn't necessarily that I really liked the wine, but I think it was really important to them that I appreciated it and that I understood when it was when is it acceptable to drink wine and how much, right? At a dinner table with, while you're eating a meal, or not at a bar when you're pounding, glass after glass after glass, just like not for the sake of getting drunk, but for the completion of like a meal, or really to just like enjoy the dining experience. And that stuck with me. So I'm really glad that they did focus on that. Although I also did the other extreme of understanding when to enjoy wine as well.
Yes. Well, it was such a gift, I think, that I didn't realize was a gift until later in life. But isn't it interesting where you can look back and sort of connect these dots that like these little coincidences or these sort of
that you never realized were part of the path.
Yes, exactly.
It's interesting. But for me, my parents, they drank wine, but they didn't really, I don't think they knew what it was like Blue Nun. They were very in like the 70s, 80s, like whatever was like the kind of like the hip drink that people were drinking. It was just sort of what was around. But it wasn't until later, it wasn't until I actually visited wineries and vineyards that I realized what went into the process and how magical it seemed to be. That's when I really, for me, that was the epiphany.
So I've got to, just as we're getting started, one of the things that I'm really excited to talk to you about, Jordan, because we're a barbecue and wine podcast, but we have not talked to anyone about the commerce side of, and I'm sure there's so much that you have to just enlighten us on in terms of like the supply chain and production and import laws and taxes and everything. But before we do that, could you quickly tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got to be who you are and in the position that you're in now?
Of course. Okay. So starting with sort of family exposure to wine, and then fast forward, I always worked in restaurants. Even in college or in the summers, I would have my internship that was meant to be, that this is your career building thing. And then I always loved working at restaurants and made some extra cash and had fun. And then after college, I remember I wanted to write. That's what I thought I wanted to do. And I was like, I'm going to live in New York City and I'm going to write. And while looking for that perfect writing job, I started to get a job hostessing to pay rent. And that ended up becoming this full-time job. I had taken some part-time or this job during the day that was like very uninspiring, and my restaurant job was always so engaging. And then that led to this other restaurant job at WD-50, which opened my eyes to the world of like competent New York restaurants, which was very different than the restaurant that I had been working before. And it was like, great chefs and press and all these amazing luminaries would come in every night. And I got to be part of these conversations and experience this level of curiosity and intellect that was very, very different from any restaurant job I had had previously. And that was so eye-opening and engaging. And then after that is when I decided, okay, I do want to stay in this restaurant world. Maybe I can merge that with writing. I'll go to culinary school and I'll like really understand restaurants, and then I can write about them. And my parents were like, that's great, but if I were you, you might want to think about your finances, and also like just strategically. And they very much encouraged what ended up being a great decision, which was to move back to Denver, Colorado. for 18 months. And during that time, which I looked at that step. I was like, this is really a step in the wrong direction. What if I never get back to New York? But in this other way, it was so motivating because I knew that I wanted to get back to New York. And so I made the most out of these 18 months where I was able to go to culinary school. And then also my mom had great advice. She was like, if you want to write for a newspaper, you should write a writing sample and drop it off at every magazine and newspaper office, and I will drive you there and I'll drive you around, but like nothing's going to happen on its own. It's time for you to take action. And so I did that. And then the place that I dreamed, of course, my voice in my head was like, no, I can never do that. And then I ended up getting this cheap eats writing job at the Denver Post. And that was, paid $150 a week, but was where I poured all of my time and effort. And then the culinary school resulted in a culinary degree and ended up being my path back to New York. And I was able to work in the kitchen at Danielle for Danielle Ballou when Danielle was like the 4-star restaurant. It was such an amazing place to be. I was there in the kitchen of the second half of 2005 and then in the dining room all of 2006. And it was actually Danielle who said, he noticed that anytime there was a wine event, I was so engaged and I would work for free as one does. And I was just so happy to be able to have those experiences. I think especially coming out of Denver, where you're so, at least at that time, Denver's food scene has come so far, but at the time it was just not worth comparing to New York's food scene. And I just felt so happy to be there. And then Danielle was the one who was like, you clearly love this. You can always have a job in the kitchen, but you should work harvest in France. And here we are with a bunch of Burgundian winemakers. Why don't you line something up with one of them? And so that resulted in my first harvest, which was 2006 at Domaine de l'Arlot. And then the next year, and I remember everyone said like, it's going to be really hard. It's really physical. And like, that's what everyone had also said in the kitchen. Like you don't look like you can handle that. And so that's always very motivating.
Yeah, it's always
really like, hey, you have very low expectations, which I plan to exceed. And
thank you for that, giving me that, that boost. Yeah,
exactly. And so that ended up being beneficial at harvest as well. But that year was the only year I actually picked for the entire time, and it was 10 days of picking. I remember like by day 6 or 7, it was really hard to sit up straight or like even stand up straight at night. And, but it was this amazing masterclass in the history of Burgundy and all of, not the gossip, because the part of, some of that you get some gossip, but really it was about like the stuff you don't read in books or the stuff that I had not come across in books. And then just for me, I'm such a visual learner. And I think having the opportunity to stand in a vineyard and pick and, think about the way the light hits you in the vineyard of Souchot and how that's so different than when you're picking in the vineyard of Clos de Forêt and Nuits Saint George, and just the bugs were different. And like everything about these vineyards was so different. You remember which vineyards your feet sink into the mud versus which ones they don't. And then at dinner, that was the first time I ever blind tasted. So everyone would blind taste. And actually my husband at the time was my boyfriend, and he had a restaurant that was very that had I think probably the preeminent Burgundy list in the country at the time, called Cru. And when I said I was going to work harvest in Burgundy, he said, I'm coming with you. It's going to be great. And in my mind, I was like, no, this is like my thing. I have to do this for myself. And he's like, I got us tickets. And it ended up being this great thing, because then he would go and he would choose these bottles, and then everyone would blind taste. And it was just it was like everyone was so present in this really great way. And so that's
a magical time. Gosh.
It was so magical. It was. And then after that, I picked for 10 days, then it was like I got the gates open, and it was like, okay, you can work harvest with me too. Like, I get that you're not going to be like a worthless stagiaire who sits on the sidelines. So that opened the door for the next really decade. And that, I think it was really that exposure to seeing the way that different wines were made and having the benefit of learning the stories of the land, of the wineries. That was wonderful, and a wonderful counterpart to my time in restaurants. So after Danielle, I went to work at a place called Veritas, and then left to work at a place called Nick and Tony's, which was my first sommelier position. And that was in East Hampton. And a woman named Bonnie Munchin hired me. She was like, I'll give you a shot. We'll see how it goes. You can have 2 nights as a sommelier, but you have to be a server for 4 nights. And I was like, great, I'll do it. And then like that first week, the person who was supposed to be the full-time sommelier no-showed on Memorial Day weekend. And so I got promoted. Exactly. Got promoted, and that was great. And then after that, it was through one of the guests at 11 Madison Park. And I guess that was like a time of both like great excitement and also like quite a bit of fear, but like fear because it was like, I don't really know what's next, but I feel like this is where I am supposed to be right now. And I remember not like thinking that way going into the summer sommelier position, like this will turn into something. I don't know how I know that, but I bet it will. And then there was a guy named Joe Z. He was a regular guest. He would come every Friday night and bring 2 bottles. And then by the end of the summer, he's like, what are you doing after this? And he's like, I'm going to work harvest. And he's like, that's not a real job. Why don't I call my friend who's business partners with Danny Meyer? You should work at one of those restaurants in the city. And then that led to working at 11 Madison Park during this really fun time when I think we had 2 stars at the time, but the ambition was 4 stars from the New York Times. And so that was the goal, and everyone on board knew that was the goal. And it was like, okay, it's not going to be easy. So everyone has to really like be in for this. Are you in?
I hate to interrupt you. Was it stressful at that time? Because
so stressful, but it was like excitingly stressful. And I feel so lucky to have been there during that time, because it was the striving moment. It was like this, can we do it? And I think I learned a lot in a bunch of different areas. John Reagan was the wine director, and he was an amazing wine director. We ended up winning the James Beard Award, Outstanding Wine Service that year. Or the next year, I think I joined in October, and then it was the next May that we got that award. But John is so focused, and he's so exacting, and he has he's really an operations genius. So he was always like the unofficial director of operations. Like I think there was another director of operations for a time, and then that person went away and the role was never refilled because John was that. So he was brilliant in wine, but really brilliant in service. And it was always so guest oriented. So I think, anyone and everyone who worked there during that time always says like that would not be a 4-star restaurant without John Reagan. But he's very humble, and he's not one to take credit in the limelight. He was very difficult to work for. I mean, I think I have said this to his face, and he knows it. And
he probably knows that people would say that.
Yeah, exactly. And he would have probably said, you were a little twerp when you were working for me in those early days. And I would probably say, yeah, I get why you'd say that. But I think, yeah, we at the end of the day, it was like everyone was committed to this goal. And I think the management team there just generally was very good at goal setting. It was always like, and actually since then, I've now, having a business, I now read business books in my free time. And one of the ones I read most recently a couple of times, it's called BE 2.0, and it's a remake of Beyond Entrepreneurship by Jim Collins and Bill Lazier. Okay. And Bill has since passed away, but he was Jim's mentor. And Jim Collins is the guy who's written Good to Great and like every seminal business book. And I learned of him through a Brene Brown podcast where she was like, Jim, everything we do right in our business is because of you. Thank you. We're so excited to have you on the show. And so I went down that rabbit hole a little bit. And one of the things that he talks a lot about is having this, he calls it a BHAG, a big, hairy, audacious goal. And it's all about, you have the values like that, those can't change. And then you have the sort of 10-year mission, but then you need the big, hairy, audacious goal that's going to be a 1 to 2 year thing that everyone on board needs to work towards. And here's how this role's goals break down. And here's how that role's go. And that was something that 11 Madison did so well. So it was like year one was like, okay, we have to like, no, none of the press knows who we are. So we got to figure out a way to like get them here. I know we'll host a party. And then it was like, then EMP became like the party spot, which was so smart and strategic, where they're like, let's host Derby Day on the same weekend that everyone's in town for the James Beard Award. So there was a lot of strategy, and but it was also really fun. And it was very stressful during those days when Frank Bruni was the reviewer at the time, and he would come in and like everyone knew how to spot Frank Bruni. So it was, but there was also like that sense of joy and accomplishment when we did meet goal after goal after goal. So that was, I think I'm going on a tangent.
No, but that's it. But it's, I think because it has a mythic quality to it in people's mind. And I've seen documentaries, I've seen different things. I had never had a chance to go there, and it just so that's why where the tangent went. But after that, did you start working with David Chang after that? Is that
I went through a phase where I was like, I'm not going to work in restaurants. Although what I did start doing a couple things. I wanted to take time off, and then anytime I was like, I'm going to take a time off from a restaurant, then like a month later, there was a very briefly a period where I worked at a restaurant called Crown. And it was the first time I ever wrote my own wine list. And it was sort of a disaster from the start. It ended with Crown being shut by the FBI.
That's a different podcast.
And it is really a different podcast. It's like, I don't know that this is the podcast to go into all that.
No, it's interesting. I'm saying it's like a whole podcast.
No, it was the one place I've ever worked where it was like, oh, this is such a values disconnect that I don't think I can. I'm only staying because it's the first place I've written the wine program, and I want 1 year on my resume because I don't want to look like a flake for the other places that might come after this. So I did stay 1 year. I remember I had to hire somebody who had no experience because she was sleeping with one of the owners. And that was interesting. And then she would do things, it doesn't matter. But I did get this mandate where it was like, well, you are working overtime and we can't have you doing that. And I was like, I'm working overtime because I'm your entire wine program, and I'm also making you like a lot of money with this wine program. So do you want to have somebody else? Like I can train somebody else, and like it's all your decision. You just tell me what you want. And they're like, great, you're going to hire this person and you're not allowed to work more than 40 hours a week. And I was like, great, can I travel? And they were like, yeah, you can go anytime you want, wherever you want. And so I ended up traveling a ton that year. Like I went to Bordeaux. I've never traveled more to any wine region I've ever wanted than that year. And it was great for that reason. And then after that, I was like, I need a break from restaurants. And then I ended up like the week that I had decided that I was going to take a break, ended up working an event in California at Copan. So Wells Guthrie had asked Robert, my husband, and I to work this event. And he said, oh, I want you guys there because Dave Chang's team is coming, Momofuku's coming. So I really want you guys to be there so we can make sure everything goes well. And I had no expectation that Dave would have been there. In fact, I was certain that he wouldn't have been there because it's like, who knows what he's doing, but it's certainly not going to be working this dinner. And Dave was there. And I remember, I think it was like I had recently, like when I was still at Crown, like maybe a month prior, I had read cover to cover Lucky Peach, one of the issues of Lucky Peach, and it was so brilliantly done. And I sent him a note, and I never heard back, and it didn't matter. It wasn't like a note to get a reply. It was just a note to be like, I love this so much. I love this Andy Warhol article where he compares Coca-Cola. Where he explains that he likes Coca-Cola because the bum on the corner drinks it and the president of the United States drinks it. I loved your like salmon Pantone chart where you talk about like how people are dyeing salmon to be Pantone colors. Who would have guessed? And it was like this anyway. So I sent that, and then Dave and I were both at this thing, and he was like, what are you up to these days? And I was like, I'm actually taking some time off of restaurants. I'm going to study for my master sommelier exam. Like that's coming up in the spring. And he's like, cool.
I would love for you to consider overseeing all of my beverage programs in the US. And that was not a thing that I could not give serious consideration to.
I imagine even just hearing that, you're like, oh, this is pretty heavy.
Yeah. Well, this is like where it's like if there was one, because the conversation I remember having like in my head at this event before that conversation was like, I feel like I've done the restaurant thing. I've worked at 11 Madison Park. We've saw that through to the 4 stars. I've worked at places like Crown. I've worked at I've sort of seen it all. There's really no place that that feels like a place that I would be a good fit for, except Momofuku. And so it was really, I feel like sometimes there is some divine intervention in some way where it's like, you can't plan that stuff. You can't wish for that because I don't know. But anyway, so that started a series of conversations. And then I joined, that was December of 2011. And then I joined in February of 2012. No, it was December of 2012. And I joined in February of 2013.
How expansive was the Momofuku empire at that time?
Yes. Okay. So let's see. There was in New York City, and initially there was a conversation about like, hey, you can take over Toronto too. And I was like, like very different. Yeah. Like the government controls everything.
Yeah, your brain
like,
had to.
Yeah. Not like that sounds fun, and like my ambition is such that like I'm not going to say no to that, but I cannot say yes to that because I don't know anything about liquor regulation or distribution in Canada. But it was the US. So at that time, that was the New York City restaurants, which were Sambar. Okay, so it was the original Noodle Bar. It was Momofuku Co., Sambar, Noodle Bar Co., and then Mapesh. And Mapesh, and then there was we knew we were opening DC, and we knew we were opening Las Vegas. But the big projects, so it was a couple things, sort of like, all right, here's the timeline. Like the priority one for right now was Mapesh, which was sort of the restaurant that wasn't like the others. Everything else hit its stride right away, and Mapesh was in Midtown instead of downtown. It was in a hotel. It was in a basement. It was not owned outright by Momofuku. So it's too many things were different about this, and it just wasn't clicking. Even though the chef there, Paul Carmichael, was amazing, and anyway, there were all these things that were sort of not quite going right. And so my original mandate was, hey, make a great wine program for Mapesh, and then you can do whatever you want. At which I spent most of my time there. But in the meantime, we made small but really fun changes at Noodle Bar. Like we got rid of regular size bottles, for example. And the thinking there was like Noodle Bar is always ahead of the curve. Noodle Bar always goes to its own drum beat. And if you're at Noodle Bar, you either want like something excellent and you want it to be the best, and you're in and out because you're busy, or you're there with the big group, so you want a Magnum. Or you're there on your own, like in between whatever you're doing, and you want like a great bottle, but you're not sharing it with everyone. You don't need a whole bottle of wine to yourself. So we did like these amazing half bottles, like basically like $10 above cost, just to get people talking and there, and that worked. And then everything else was out of Magnum. So all of our by the glass wines were Magnum, and then that was really fun. And then so that was my passion. And Co, we did an all sparkling pairing, and that was one that came about. That conversation came about in my initial conversation with Dave, and I was like, Dave, I think it would be so fun to do this. And he was like, I've wanted to do that for years, and the chefs never let me do it. Like, yeah,
it sounds so great.
So you have to convince them first. And so that was like the management style at 11.
Oh, that's
Madison
really
Park.
Interesting into the mindset. Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, well, it was like so different, where it was like very much like Dave was like, look, I'm not going to get involved. I think it's a great idea. You have to like figure out how to convince everyone else that it's a good idea. Whereas at EMP, it was very much like the order comes from the top, and everything feeds up to the big goal. And of course it's different because Momo was many restaurants and EMP was one, but the way to get to sort of the beginning and then to the end was just a very different approach.
It's empowering, right? I guess I'm trying to think
so empowering and so fun because you get to think, and not that you didn't get to think at 11 Madison Park, but your job was sort of to be a robot, like a really great,
Like
polished,
well-tuned. Yeah. Like, yeah.
well-tuned robot. Yeah. Like you had to be like an Aston Martin, whereas like you get to be a human being more. And I say that with no, like that's without disparagement. Like nowhere did I learn more than at 11 Madison Park in terms of how to study for, like how to, so you're training yourself to be one way versus training your brain to be a different way. And there was so much freedom and creativity, and that was so fun and so empowering. And as a result, I like
it's fascinating that you were able to have both those, to be a part of both those worlds.
Yes, I think EMP for me was really hard because you don't like, it was hard, but it was great. You're like, you're there because you know that it's for this goal. And I think for my life at the time, like my resume at EMP resulted in my ability to have the job at Momofuku in a lot of ways. I think that mattered to Dave, that I could operate with that kind of structure, but that also it was important that I didn't have to operate in it. And there's always a learning curve, at least for me, there always is. So, at first I was like, we should do things this way. And like, to the credit of Dave and his team, like actually I need to shout out Sue Wong Ruiz, who is the GM of Co. Not at the initial restaurant, like we moved Co, and that was the big deal. And Dave was like, we need to have Sue as the GM. And Sue is so amazing. She was and is, she's not at Co anymore. She left last December, but her approach to service was so thoughtful and genuine, and like John Reagan, it was always about the guest, but it wasn't with this like, carrot or a stick. It was like, let's talk this through and think about it. I understand your point of view that you want to do this way, but is that because you did it that way at 11 Madison Park, or what about, here's my thinking behind it. And so there was just so much thought that was also, it was an open-minded thought versus closed-minded thought. And again, they both work well. But I think what Sue did at Co that resulted in it being so special is there was a warmth to it. I guess that's maybe the thing that was different was warmth. And so
how many seats was Co? Because Co was tiny, right?
Co was tiny. So the original Co was 12 seats. And then the new Co was 24 seats plus this wine table where we got to do a reverse wine pairing.
You've been talking a lot about these New York restaurants, and I lived there around that time. And it's like hitting me so hard right now that this was all, Facebook existed, but Instagram did not. Like, it wasn't a social media era. And there was a feeling when you ate somewhere special, it felt very intimate because you weren't sharing it with the world, right? Like you weren't taking photos of your food and putting it. So when I first moved to New York and I was staging at Per Se, it was like my 10-day harvest trial, right? Like, we need to see you suffer and stick with it. And so after week 2, people really started embracing me and talking to me more and kind of like bringing me into the fold. And I felt like I was making friendships, and I was. And one night they invited me out because the certain shifts, everybody had the same 2 days off. So if you were like AM, you had these 2 days off. So this whole crew had the same days off. And I think they hung out a lot because of their schedules. And so I was invited to go to Noodle Bar. And I didn't know anything about Noodle Bar. I was very new to New York, but I could tell they were all really excited about it. And we got there, we waited in line. I think there was a group of 4 of us, which was like a big group for Noodle Bar. I mean, I don't think it was very spacious. Not that I recall. It was very much like a bar with bar seating and maybe a couple of tables. I don't really remember tables. And it was this great experience. And it was all these chefs from Per Se. And that's really when it dawned on me that like this city has these really special moments like everywhere. All you have to do is go. And it wasn't special because I was with Per Se chefs. It wasn't special because of anything other than just this dining experience felt really unique to me coming from Houston. Like I hadn't experienced anything like it. And it really, caused me to think differently about what I wanted to do as a chef and what it was that we were doing as chefs, because we're really part of this big hospitality circle, right? The food is just this one aspect. The drink is just this one aspect. The service is one aspect, but how they all work together is so critical. And when you have this tiny little space with these few seats, you have so few opportunities to really nail it. And I felt like they nailed it. And then I went to Sambar. Sambar became like my late night after work dinner.
Yes. Like the Bosom with all the sauces. And when they stopped serving the what I used to get late night was like a burrito.
Yeah.
Like edamame. They got rid of that pretty early on. And that was like my, I want to say they closed at 2 a.m. That was my 2 a.m. after I got off of work at Babo. I would go.
You worked at Babo too. I think I had forgotten that. Yeah. That's so amazing. We could have so many other offline conversations, or even online. We could go so many directions.
It's weird. It is weird doing this when we talk to people, and it seems like Erin's path has she's crossed path with so many different people, because it just feels like you guys were all kind of in New York at that same time.
Yes,
exactly. A number of people we talked to, and like even Billy Journey was like there's a whole thread throughout this.
And you're friends with Billy, or you know Billy, right?
Yes. In fact, we just got to hang out at this wedding a few weeks ago, or a
couple
months
Ireland?
Ago at this point. No, it was in New York. Actually, it was a New York wedding. But it was like mostly basketball players, and then there was like a little small group of like restaurant people, and so we all got to hang out. But oh no, he's a perfect person to be on this podcast.
Yeah, no, we love Billy. Now he was just, we could have talked to him for, like, we could probably talk to you for 4 hours. We could have talked to him for 4 hours. It was he was seated, I think, between like the Beastie Boys and Run DMC.
Yeah, he had some really good art behind him.
Good art. It was just so Billy. He's amazing.
He's such an easy person to be around. That's why I really like Billy.
Yes. Wait, you were saying Babo. Okay, so you were working at Babo, and then you would go in.
Yeah. So my late night, my route to get home was I would walk all the way to, First Avenue. It's been a long time since I lived in New York. I would walk all the way to First Avenue, get I think they just called it the Somm. I can't remember. But it was the burrito. It was like an Asian burrito. And then I would get in a cab and eat it on my way home. And that was dinner at 2 a.m. And then they stopped making it. And I had friends that eventually worked there, and they were the ones that told me like, hey, we're not going to make it anymore. And I'm like, what? You can't, you have to make it for me at least. But, yeah. And I mean, I feel like the impact that those restaurants had on the New York scene back then. And so we're talking 2008, 2007, 2008, 2009, like all in that time frame.
Yep. It changed the conversation.
It's interesting how if something along the way didn't happen, we wouldn't be talking. Like there's just like all these important things that happen along the way. That's what always blows me wrong when I think about people's lives, and how one turn around a corner, one discussion, or one waiting an hour longer at something that
100%, right? Like I almost didn't go to the California thing. I was there for something else. I was like, okay, fine, I'll do this. But no, it is so true. I feel like not that we're going this direction on this podcast, but I recently discovered one night, late night, looking for something on Audible, this Deepak Chopra book that I listened to on Audible. And he talks a lot about the role of coincidences and how he compares it to like a rose. Like if you have a seed of a rose, like a rose's job is to become a rose, and like the rose will never become an apple tree or a pear tree or anything else. And like what the rose needs is like water and the right environment, but the rose is like destined to like fulfill its promise of becoming a rose. And that if you look at one's life in this same context, it's sort of like he considers coincidences to be the universe's messages to make sure that you understand you're on the same path. And so he encouraged this. He said, I keep a coincidence log, and of course there are some things that are very small coincidences, but there are other things that are just too powerful to be anything other than divine signs from, divine, whatever that means to each of us, but you sort of from this higher creative source of intelligence to point us the right direction into this destiny that we're meant to grow. And I think, yeah, when I think about so many moments, right, where like I was committed to becoming a writer, and then the moment where I decided not to was like, yeah, there were just too many points.
Like nudges, like little subtle nudges.
Like that's not what you're supposed to do, or that's not what you're supposed to do.
Or your mom taking you to all those places in Denver. That's pivotal.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
And all these mentors along the way that people don't, you might not realize at the time that they are stewards for your life. And what's the deep, what is that? What's the book? Because I can put a link
it's
to it.
Called so I'll send them separately, but I'll give you two. The first one was the 7 Spiritual Laws of Success, and then I liked it so much that I was like, I guess this Deepak guy is onto something. And then I landed on the Spontaneous Fulfillment of Desire, which is where he really goes deep into the role of coincidences.
Wow, thank you very much.
That's,
I'll put a link below for people so that way
I love them. I've listened to them both now multiple times, like in the last month. It's like sometimes your brain or your body or your soul needs something that's different from another time in life.
There's always a time and a place a lot of times for
exactly.
So I'm assuming everybody's like, so how did Ramona?
Yes. Okay. So early on, I want to say like within my first few months, I remember I've never enjoyed beer. I just don't, for me, it's not delicious. So I never crave beer. I associate it in my life exclusively with like college parties. And I always wished that there was something that was more enjoyable. And then that carried through into my adult life. And there were just so many moments where it was sort of a beer moment. And I just wished that there was an alternative to that. And then the more I went through wine and my career in wine and noticed these sort of patterns or these through lines of value systems, whether it's a great winery in Patagonia or Italy or Burgundy, there's sort of this commitment to quality or to not adding stuff or, whatever it is. And I just felt like, I think the other thing that was really important, and it's weird that I've already referenced it in this conversation, but it was the Lucky Peach article where Andy Warhol talks about Coca-Cola.
I want to look that up so badly after we.
It's like I forget the exact quote, but effectively he says, Coca-Cola is the best, and the bum on the corner knows it's the best, and the president of the United States knows that it's the best, and that's why I drink Coca-Cola. And there was this sort of democratization of quality, which has always been really interesting to me. Like my parents now are really interested in wine and different kinds of wine because they would come and visit me when I was working Harvest at Burgundy. And so now they have that reference point, but we did not grow up with, it was just this notion that quality should not be reserved for people who can afford to collect, tens of thousands of dollars worth of wine. And so that sort of was in my head. And then I remember having a conversation with a friend early on at Momo, and we're like, remember, like, okay, I'm going to reference wine coolers, but I want to make it very clear that I do not endorse wine coolers. I do not think they're delicious. I'm not promoting them in any way. But this idea of a wine cooler, at least catering on a taste level, is being better than beer. Or crappy beer, the crappy wine cooler in the 80s, 90s, was at least a different flavor profile. And I was like, what? My thought was always why has nobody done that better? Why is there not a fine wine value system, but for casual moments, for any time, anywhere? And that was where the idea came from. And then, of course, I discovered spritzes. I think it was working Harvest in Montalcino one year, and I would have an Aperol spritz every afternoon. And I just thought, this is so lovely. It was a sort of moment of joy. And now Aperol is everywhere. But Aperol was it was a little bit exotic at the time. And it was oh, I get it. A wine cooler is actually a bad American knockoff of a spritz. And so what if we just take the value system and we did it better? We used organic grapes and real fruit, and we didn't have weird chemicals. And wouldn't that be fun? like, why has nobody done that? And then that idea never left, but I was just always too busy to focus on it because it was like, okay, well, now we're opening another restaurant, or DC's opening, or the MS exam. So I took the MS 3 times. The first was 2013 May, and I ended up passing blind tasting. And so I then was like part of this group of people, like right in between the old system and the new one. The old system was you have 3 years to pass the 3 parts in whatever order you choose. And the new system is you have to pass theory first, and then you can be led forth to take the other 2. And so I was the last year of the old system. And then because I passed blind tasting on that first try, I was in this like little subgroup of people who had 2 more years before resetting. So the second year I passed nothing, and I deserved to pass nothing. I did not study hard enough. The third year I studied like I've never studied for anything in my life. And we also had just moved so I was on the floor every night. I remember Bobby Stuckey, who oversees service for the court, came in with, and he's amazing. And he said, what you're doing right now at Co with this tasting menu is like, this is what I'm going to tell everyone they need to like have on their radar and come visit. Like we were doing some things that I want to get to a tangent because I just think it's fun to talk about. But one of the things that came out of the original sparkling pairing was this was a pairing in which we rinsed the glass with Van Jones. So there was a pairing that I know was like a test from the chefs, because their goal was to like trip me up so that they could be like, you don't know what you're doing. And my goal was to show them that I could like pass their test of whatever their test was. And so this one day mid-service, they switch up the dish. They're like, we're not doing the whatever anymore. Now we're doing a new soup, and it's shishito pepper broth with orange gelée and brioche. So it was like a super Pierazzini broth with like bits of pepper floating. And it was like, and I was like, okay, I got this. We'll do sparkling Sauvignon Blanc. And I remember trying the Sauvignon Blanc that we had on hand, and it was a terrible match. It made the wine taste like pickle brine. And then I tried a few other things, and like everything was like fell flat. And so we got through the night with like a sparkling Portuguese wine. And then we like bought the rest of that sparkling Portuguese wine for the rest of the week. And then like the distributor was out and we were back to square one. And so I read this book called Taste Buds and Molecules as like a last resort. And it was this guy who was briefly the sommelier for Ferran Adria's restaurants. And his whole thing was like, hey, everything is science. We'll just break it all down. Like, this wine has these flavor molecules. So like these wines also have those. So this will be a good pairing. And it was so clinical and like, I would say charmless. It was not how I think about pairings. There was no sort of consideration of texture or context, but it was really interesting from a molecule perspective. And this one page on Oloroso sherry was crazy. And it was like Oloroso sherry had like 100 different molecules that would pair well with other things like caramel, but also, green beans and whatever. And so I remember thinking, I wonder if there's a way where we can use this. And Oloroso sherry is too high in alcohol. It's fortified, but we had Venjone. And so I ended up rinsing the glass with Venjone and then pouring in a sparkling Cremant de Jura from the same producer. And it worked. And it worked so well that it made the wine, it made the pairing better, and it made the soup better. And that was like a seminal moment in my relationship with the kitchen team where they're like, okay, like you passed our test. Well, like we will let you have time at lineup now. Like, yes, like we'll give you the time of day. Fine, on to the next. And so that pairing then ended up being part of our pairing menu when we moved Co, and we were doing other things as well. But it's also just like a good trick to have up your sleeve. Like it pretty much works with anything. If you ever have something where you're like, this doesn't pair with anything, it will probably pair with a Venjone rinse. And then, so back to the MS exam. So I'm like very practiced in service, and I study my table feathers off for theory, and I end up like passing theory with flying colors. And then it's service time and I don't run out of time and I answer every question correctly. And I'm like, oh my God, I think I passed, because I don't know what I would have flubbed on. And then it came time for feedback, and it turned out that I had not passed because a group of sommeliers at one of the tables decided I didn't seem like myself to them.
Huh.
And meanwhile, none of them had ever seen me work in a restaurant. I don't know any of them. And it was just like a gut punch because there's no amount of studying or practice that can make you seem more like yourself to a group of people who don't know you. And the gift of that, like, frankly, absurd feedback was that it was like too absurd to actually take seriously. Like, by the time I got over it, like at first it was this gut punch. And then actually a week later, I found out I was pregnant. And back to this coincidence, it was like, I happened to be in Italy for something. I was there for a wedding, but then I like tagged on another couple of days for this other project. And it was there in Italy where I had like all these epiphanies, and it was like, okay, I do have to do this, and this thing should exist. And now my mind is not preoccupied with this MS exam. Now it's actually focused on this thing that I think, like now is the time to actually.
Yeah, it was a gift.
It was a gift.
But a weird, like, and it is strange. Like, how would someone be able to judge who you are as a person? And that was like right before, I mean, it was probably a few years before, like this, now they're sort of in a PR scandal with, sexual assault stuff and cheating stuff. And they have a lot of things that they are working through. So it was another, I guess a gift in that way too, where, I think in some ways it's a really great organization in that it can provide structure and education, but then nothing is perfect. And that group has some things to work out. So had
you passed, how many women at that time were master sommeliers?
Yes. Okay. So I think it was like 39 at the time. And it was actually a woman who gave me the feedback that I didn't seem like myself to her. And I think about that now, and that's been actually a really great thing, because I think just as a person in this world who is a woman, it's like we have to be so aware. And like as now the owner of a company, I need to be so thoughtful about every decision. Like, it's so easy to not, and I think I feel sort of bad for that person, because her entire identity is tied up with this exam, and like that is her identity. And I think that's why it would have been really disappointing for her if I had passed, because then she would be one of 40 women master sommeliers instead of 39, and like it's sort of like the pie isn't big enough. Whereas that's like, as a result, I don't think about the world in that way, and I think it's a good reminder that like our decisions have ramifications, and we have the opportunity to lift people up or not. And so I try to be a supportive human in this industry. But I mean, I get why she would have made the decision she did. But
you get it, but it doesn't sit
but it's
right.
disappointing. Yeah, exactly. It's like, oh, that's not who I want to be. Like, that's not who I want to show up as in the world.
But it's good also too, like, to kind of be able to feel grounded in that belief. Like,
yes,
that's who I am.
Exactly. And I think that was the gift of that entire experience, was like, oh, I thought that I wanted this, but why did I want it? I wanted it because I knew I felt like I had outgrown, or I had done what I had hoped to do at Momofuku with our beverage programs. And it was time for a new adventure. And in my mind, the way to that new adventure was through the Court of Master Sommeliers, but in reality, it wasn't, which is like another good reminder that sometimes you don't know, like the universe has a different plan for you that's much better than you could have imagined.
I don't know if you picked up on this, Kevin, but Jura has been a theme in now 3 podcasts. So we talked a lot about Jura with Billy, and then Jeff Porter, and it came up. And now you're talking about it as this kind of pivotal thing for you with that tasting menu that you had to put together. I feel like the universe is really, really sending us a lot of signals
that we need to go.
That we need to go
to the Jura.
That needs to be episode 15. And
you should have it with. You should totally interview Guillaume d'Andreville and talk about
Write that down,
Kevin.
Kevin.
It's interesting how that there's all these things that are folding into this podcast journey too.
Very, very independently, each interview, it has been woven into like the thread of the interview in a very nonchalant way, not as like the sole focus, but it's there and it's present. And I keep registering that and going, somebody's telling me something.
Oh, that's so fun.
That is interesting. But how do you start a beverage company? That's not an easy feat, right?
Yeah, no. And I was very terrified when I learned I was pregnant, because that was like not a thing that you do in my mind. It was like in my mind, I think like I had really internalized these messages of like, okay, you get to pick one. You can either have your career, which had been my identity at that point or up until that point, or you can be a mom, and like you don't get to do both. And so I think that was like another thing that was, so I was really focused, especially on maternity leave, on like trying to figure out as much as possible. And my goal was like, okay, great. You have 3 months off from like work 24/7 to figure this out. And a lot of things came into place, but so much of it is just taking the action, like calling. I remember just having calls with so many people with mobile canning lines. And like there was at one time, there was like one in the United States, and we were pretty early to this can scene. And we weren't like, we need to do wine in a can. It was like, no, we want something that actually tastes good, that's for anyone, anytime, anywhere. And the winery partner we found that was willing to give this project a try was like, we can't do bottles, but you can probably figure out a mobile canning line, maybe go that route. And so it was really a function of, or like they didn't have the bottle that I liked. They had some other bottle and I didn't like it as much. And so it was like, okay, bottles versus cans. The environment was important to me since the beginning. And so when I was just doing an analysis of the carbon footprint required to ship a can versus a bottle, I felt like, okay, we can go for a can here. But it was like, yeah, I think a lot of it was like recipe testing, and then it was getting in touch with it. So it was like not linear, but it was like all of these things on this giant list need to happen in whatever order. Some of it was like TTB registration, and then you need to translate like a recipe of like grapefruit juice in the can, like grapefruit juice and wine into like this. And actually one thing that's different about the US versus Italy, we moved production to Italy after our test batch. So for the test batch, it was very different. Then you're figuring out the can source, the canning line, the winery partner. And then you need a formula, and you have to register that through the TTB. And in the US, like the person we found to help us with this was wonderful, but he was like, look, the way flavors work, like you can't use real grapefruit, like that just doesn't exist here. You have to find grapefruit flavor, but don't worry, there are lots of great grapefruit flavors. And so we find one that's like, it's really important that it's natural and it's organic and these things. And then like we got so far down the line, and and then the TTB would wait like 60 days to like reply to an email and just all that nonsense. But finally we get the recipe, and then like 60 days after that, they're like, you need to put FD&C 40 on this label. And I was like, we would never use that. And it's like, it's in your natural flavor. So I share this because there were so many things about the US production where it was like, secretly we've added toxic coal tar based artificial color to your natural flavor. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, dude, look away.
And so that was part of it. And then we figured out that mess. And then it came time to canning day. And on canning day, that was when I learned about Velcorin, because I was told that I had to use it. And at this point, I had poured my savings into this test batch. Velcorin, I was like, I don't, they're like, you can use Velcorin or potassium sorbate. And I knew potassium sorbate was a carcinogen on the no-fly list at Whole Foods. And I said, I don't want to use that. And they're like, great, you can use Velcorin. It breaks down to inert.
So just so people know that Ronan's with us.
Ronan is with us.
If there's a surprise, there's now a child. So what was the ingredient that they wanted to include?
Oh, they wanted to include Velcorin, and I was told it was it broke down into inert gases, and it wasn't a big deal. And they said, we're not canning this unless all right, so Velcorin, I was told broke down to inert gases and wasn't an issue, and that I either had to use Velcorin or potassium sorbate, and so in the end, I went with Velcorin and then started looking it up. In fact, like once I gave the green light for that, and it was after a lot of conversation, but there wasn't much information on it. Somebody came out with a hazmat suit, and I was like, "Who's that guy?" And like, he's just administering the Velcorin. Yeah, so
that
it
says
gets
a lot.
administered. Yeah, gets administered with a hazmat suit, and then like most of like if you Google it, you'll find very little information. You really have to do some digging because most of it is like propaganda by the people who are selling it. And
Why does it have to be included? Is it keep it shelf stable or something?
Yeah. So all right. So it breaks down to methanol and CO2. So sure, CO2 is not an issue.
What's methanol?
Methanol is poison. It's poison even in tiny doses. It can create blindness. So it's a really big deal. And then, yeah, so since then I've made friends with a biochemist who has helped me understand it more. It hydrolyzes into formaldehyde. And so, so this was concerning to me. And after looking around quite a bit in the US, I was not able to find a facility that will can without using Velcorin. I think it's also being
so
pushed.
interesting.
It's so crazy, and it's being, I think, subsidized. Part of the other thing is that you don't have to say it, so nobody has to put it on. But I will say that we moved production to Italy because we are able to pasteurize cans in warm water, which is obviously not a new technology, and it's not an expensive technology. But it's clearly not being subsidized by the chemical lobby.
That's very, very fascinating. Just that alone. With all those challenges, though, when you decided to switch, like, were there times that you were in doubt that this would work?
Totally, especially with the Italy thing, and I think that was like another one of those. It was like, okay, but it was like you get so many red stoplights. It's like there's so many stop signs or so many no's, and then all of a sudden, like, yeses where you wouldn't expect them. And I think that was when we finally moved production to Italy. It was something that was almost like a last resort out of necessity, but then it was like, oh, this is the only way we can actually make the product that we want to make and that we want to drink. And so that was that in a weird way made a lot of things easier. Like, we still make everything in Italy because I don't want to use Velcorin. Like, full stop. And we'll get emails from people who reach out and they're like, oh, we have a new facility, like, you should work with us. I'm like, great, we don't use Velcorin. And they're like, why not? It's so great. And then it's like, I'm not looking to be sold on Velcorin.
yeah But there are I'm sure that people reach out to Erin all the time, even me, like, for things like it's just it's a constant issues.
Totally
People ask podcasts and what's all that crazy.
Was glad you said yes to this one. People ask me all the time, and I don't think they mean this question negatively, but they say, what makes Ramona different than other canned wine? And I always say, well, it's the quality of what's in the can. I'm not saying canned wine is in general a bad product, but I've not come across a canned wine where I feel like the quality is at the level of Ramona. Every ingredient is thought through. There's nothing in this can that hasn't been approved by somebody with really high standards. And it translates. I feel like people, they don't realize how much they care about it until you present it like that. And they're like, oh, wow. And then they taste it and they're like, oh, it is good. And I'm like, it is good. And it's like, it's good. It's actually good for you. Like, it's underappreciated until you're have an awareness for it. And then all of a sudden you're looking on cans for information that's not even going to be on there.
I was just wondering if you're finding a lot of people pairing this seems like it's ideal for barbecue.
It is.
Yeah.
I don't know if Jordan is encountering that, but it's great for barbecue because at least in the US, barbecue has a very big connection with beer. And I don't think it's beer itself. I think it's the can that you crack open. I think it's like a cold, refreshing beverage. Those are the real links. And Ramona satisfies all of that, but it satisfies my need to have like a really good quality product on the menu. and have it be wine, since my focus is really pairing wine and barbecue. So Ramona makes it easy for me to do that. And then we do the little buckets. So we do it reads as a beer on our menu in the sense that like we can sell it as a bucket with 4 cans together, kind of like you can get a bucket of beer, and people can enjoy it casually
great.
and easily, right? Just like you could a can of beer, but it's wine and it's good quality. It suits our purposes very well.
I'm so honored that it is on the menu and that it has been on the menu. So I want to thank you so much for for like, being this amazing communicator of Ramona and for sharing it with people and for introducing it to new people.
And Erin has spoken about it since day one of this podcast, and I ended up ordering it online, and it ships so easily. And
good.
And I love the marketing, and I love the packaging, and I love the accessibility. It makes you feel good about being part of a product too. Like feels very well thought out, but also feels like you're part of. You're in the know, which is like, it's a weird, I don't know if that makes any sense, but it just feels like you're part of something that's better than what is out there. So that's
the ultimate compliment. That is the ultimate compliment. Well, and when we launched, there weren't a ton of things in cans. So that wasn't the point. It wasn't like, we'll be in a can because that's trending. It was like, no, we'll be in a can because it's portable and because it's recyclable and because it's single serve. And that is like the purpose is that it should be easy, whether you're at home or on the go or outside drinking barbecue or inside drinking barbecue.
And it seems like it's hot everywhere almost all the time now. So it's perfect for that type of.
Speaking of recycling and carbon footprint,
it's perfect for the weather, and also to like it works in the cold. But if on a hot day, a cold beverage like this is so delicious. Did you think were you going to have only 4 flavors at first or 2, or how did you?
No, it was one of those things where it was like, okay, initially I thought we would do peach and make it locally. And that was where I realized it's like very difficult to make anything organic in the US with US products. And just A, it's difficult to find, but then B, it's very expensive if you do. And so that was where we started looking outside at Italy and then just doing some taste tests. We looked at a base wine and basically landed on Zabibo as the sort of base grape from Sicily. And then it was really a matter of like what tasted the best. It was like, okay, what can we do? Like, what's the best? Like, we have to start with one, what's the most delicious? And like I wanted to channel at that point as sort of this idea of a spritz where it's a little bit bitter, but a little bit sweet, but it's balanced and it's refreshing. And that was how we landed on grapefruit. And then it was really like, I guess this is like what also feels like in retrospect, because I never realized that Italy was so critical. And then every step we take, it's like, oh, Italy is foundational to who we are. And oh, I happen to be Italian. And so does my grandfather, who I never met. So it's like, it's funny in reverse, where it's like, I could not have planned it, but then it was like everything just sort of like keeps going this direction. So in basically the quality of citrus that we're able to source in Sicily is really high. So the lemons for our lemon, and then the blood oranges for our blood orange. And the rosé that we make is not from Sicily, that's from Abruzzo, but everything else is very Sicily based. And it was sort of like, that was just where the quality was happening. And that was where I happened to have some relationships. So it was like both the best case scenario and also the easiest thing with the fewest barriers because of pre-existing relationships. And that was how we ended up really leaning into Sicily or even just to Italy. And then with Amarino, I guess Amarino exists because as somebody who loved Aperol spritzes, yes, there it is. Kevin has Amarino. I learned recently, I mean, I guess a few years ago, it was like maybe 3 or 4 years ago, that when Campari bought Aperol, they changed the recipe. So it used to be this like old recipe from 1919. And then when Campari bought it, they changed the recipe, and now it's colored with FD&C40 and red and yellow number 5. And these are artificial colors that are coal tar derivatives, which are part of a group of class 1 carcinogens, and they were never meant to be included. In fact, there was a period of time where they were supposed to be banned under the FDA. But then it was like the person in charge of the FDA, it was like a swap of who was in charge. And so like the banning never happened. Yeah, just one of these other things where it's like, okay, and if you look on a bottle of, anyway, it was a long story short, it was like the idea of a spritz, this sort of that slightly bitter, or that like, yeah, that like bitter, citrusy, botanical spritz is very classic, dates back coincidentally to the early 20th century, to an art movement known as the Italian Futurist movement, that then spawned a cocktail movement called the Italian Futurist Cocktail Movement. Wow. And that, yeah, it's fun to go down this rabbit hole if you like need something to go down the rabbit hole on one day. So the art movement spawns the cocktail movement, and this group of mixologists, like the group of artists, they want their identity to be tied to the future instead of the past. And so their whole focus is on creating new things that nobody's ever seen before. So or like this almost like a referendum on culture previously. So they would do things like put stuff anchovies into communion wafers and make that a garnish of a cocktail, which they renamed Polybibites. It was this whole thing. Anyway, Aperol comes out of that, Campari comes out of that, Select, and a lot of these spirits that we think of as aperitivos. Wow. And so this notion of this sort of bitter but bright, but like, yeah, this sort of this very Italian spritz. Who doesn't love that? And who doesn't love that messaging? And sort of out of the old comes the new. And so that was something we wanted to celebrate, but we wanted to do it with a different recipe and making sure that we were using organic products and wine base and no cane sugar. And then our coloring is this organic, it's from organic carrots and pumpkins. And so sort of like, okay, how do we take this idea that we love, but make sure that it fits our value system?
Wow, that's astounding. So everything kind of happened organically, so to speak.
Yeah.
No pun intended.
Completely you did it.
No,
yes, exactly.
Well, it was like, this should exist. It's sort of like, hey, what is the thing I want to exist, but it doesn't yet. Like, why can't there be a spritz that's also organic? Actually, since then, so since last year, through our Italian winery partner, we're now certified sustainable through a company called Equalitas.
Oh, great.
And this is the sustainability certification is called 3E. So it's environmental as well as ethical and economic. So everyone in the supply chain is treated fairly and paid a fair wage. The winery has solar panels that power 90% of everything in the winery. There's a water filtration system. So yeah, it was like one of these things where like there's just this values alignment, which I feel really fortunate to have.
Wow, that's amazing.
Very cool.
And even we've been talking for an hour and a half, and we could talk for a long time, but I don't know how how people are. But if I want to make sure
was asking for some snuggles.
Is there anything specific that you want to make sure that we cover? Because I know that people can find you in Whole Foods, which Whole Foods are now somebody owns Whole Foods, so I'm assuming it's across everywhere, right? Whole Foods are
everywhere except for the Dakotas, Pennsylvania, and Utah, and I think West Virginia. Like for whatever reason, those states they do their own thing when it comes to liquor. But yes, and then online at drinkramona.com. And I feel like we should do like a special code, like Ramona 15 could be for 15% off. And I know that that's like a code that we have in our system already. So that can be like a
that'll
special
be great. And
I'll
put that in the intro as well, so that way people know. Amazing. And I'll put it in anything that I write up about it. We'll make sure we include that. And is there anything that I guess online? Like can they get it at most liquor stores or is it mostly?
Yes, I mean, I would say.
Or ask for it, I guess, if you don't.
Whole Foods, yes, Whole Foods near you. Many fine wine independent retailers, online, of course.
And if you don't see it, ask for it.
Ask for it, please. That would make me so happy. That would be, and then they'll carry it, and that would be the dream. And
you have merch, and also too, I think what the Spritz, what's it called, the Spritz Club,
Spritz Society.
Spritz Society, yes, the Spritz Society, yes, it's a club. 3 different levels.
Right? Yes, 3 different levels, and you can. That way, it's basically like you don't have to think about it. Ramona just will ship to your door 4 times a year,
which is ideal.
And then there are like different discounted tiers that are built into that as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you
Yeah.
so much for
Well, thank
taking the
you
time.
guys.
This has been
Yes.
fantastic. It's
Mhm.
so eye-opening on so many different levels. These always go down a
Yeah.
different path than we imagined, but this has been so great.
Yes.
Well,
Thank you so
likewise.
much.
Thank you both so much. And thank you again for making today work and for making it work with all three of our time zones. It's really wonderful Kevin, to meet you, and Erin, to see you. And thank you so much for having me on the show.
That was fantastic. What do we have coming up for Feges in the next month?
We're really busy this month doing some more wine dinners. We've got some private wine dinners booked, and we're doing our cooking class. Our second cooking class is going to be September 25th. That is unfortunately already sold out. Well, fortunate for us, unfortunate for anyone who might be interested.
Yeah.
And then this is the season where things get crazy. And
Yeah.
so my whole August and the first part of September has been dedicated to Thanksgiving. Like we're already tracking for October and November in terms of holidays and events and things.
That's
that
interesting for people
up.
to know about how a restaurant works, because that's how you guys have to think that far in advance. Who would think that August, September, you'd already be into Thanksgiving? Yeah.
And I don't know how much this has to do with the pandemic and just things getting tighter and things getting harder, but turkeys have to be ordered. Like we had to order our turkeys already to guarantee that we would have turkeys for Thanksgiving. We're starting nationwide shipping this year, so we're going to be shipping Thanksgiving packages through Goldbelly.
That's cool to know. Okay.
So, we went from doing 40 turkeys to doing 300 turkeys. And so there's a logistical component to that. We've had to rent a reefer truck. We've had to have an electrician come out and install an electrical outlet to accommodate said truck. Just kind of trying to figure out how we're going to store all the shipping materials, because those don't break down. I mean, it's an insulated box, so the size that it is when you receive it is the size that it is when we receive it. So there's a massive space issue. So that's really what we have going on right now. We're also getting into the beginning of events season. So we've got some really great events coming up in September, October, and November. That we're really looking
events
forward
outside
to.
of Feges that you're
outside of the restaurant. Yeah. So one of the ones that we look forward to every year, but it's been on recess for the last 2 years because of the pandemic, is Southern Smoke. So that's coming up October 23rd. So not this month, but we're already in full swing thinking about it. And the tickets are on sale. It's one of the most fun events for us to be part of, but it's also something that we are really passionate about raising money for. So it's just a really great thing that exists for our hospitality industry.
Is that in Charleston?
No, so we do have an event in Charleston. We're doing Holy Smoke in Charleston.
Okay, that's Holy Smoke in Charleston. Okay, that's what I'm.
Holy Smoke is in Charleston. So Southern Smoke is, it was founded by Chris Shepard, who's local Houston. So the event's always been in Houston. The main fundraiser, so the Southern Smoke Festival, has always been in Houston. They've since branched out. I know they donated a bunch of money to Chicago, and there's been some kind of satellite events in other cities to help raise money for hospitality industries throughout the country. So not just here in Houston. But
is that the one that I remember seeing photos maybe many years ago of a stage with a check, a bit like it was a big.
Yes.
Okay. That looks like a fun festival.
It's grown so much and evolved. It started out as an MS fundraiser for Tie It Into Wine, for Antonio Gianola, who is a big and very important person in Houston in the wine community. And he was a dear friend of Chris Shepard's. And so when he was diagnosed with MS, I think this was Chris's kind of response to that news, was just like, I have to do something. I can't do nothing. And I think in that first year, I'm making this up, I'm sure, but I want to say we raised with that, it seemed big at the time, but in retrospect to the festivals that they put on since it's small, that small festival raised, I think, $273,000 for MS, which was huge. Well, I mean, now that's a small fraction of how much is raised each year through the festival. And it's grown. So Pat Martin, Billy Durney, Rodney Scott, these are all names that have been part of the festival for years, and will be part of the festival again this year. But now it's even bigger. You know, Brooke Williamson, Tom Colicchio, Gail Simmons, Claudette Zepeda. Like, this list is huge. I want to say there's like 40 or 50 chefs involved this year. So it's this massive list of local talent, and then just a lot of people from outside, from all over the country. And Ashley Christensen's part of it. So, and there's events every day. The big final event that kind of the whole weekend is culminating to is on Sunday, the 23rd, but there are also events on Friday and Saturday involving some of the other chefs. And so I highly recommend people go to southernsmoke.org and learn about the festival, learn about what the fundraising is for.
Wow.
And if you are so inclined to purchase a ticket, because they sell out very quickly.
I'll put a link below, but we're getting closer to October 23rd. So
it's not that far away.
It's not that far away. No, it's tomorrow essentially. Yeah. That's so great. I didn't know as much now. Thank you for enlightening us and me about that, because I knew about it, but I didn't know it to that extent. And then, and then there's the Texas Monthly Barbecue Festival. You guys are at that, right?
Yes. So this will be our first time doing it, because of scheduling reasons, but also this is the first time we are on their top 50 list, because we weren't open for the previous list. And it's in Lockhart. It's the first weekend in November. So I want to say it's the 5th and the 6th. Yes. So I'm really excited. I think moving it to Lockhart from Austin was a really good move. We'll see how it all plays out logistically, but that's kind of the beating heart of Texas barbecue. And we've forgotten, it's almost as if Texas barbecue can at times kind of forget its heart and soul. And so this festival, I think, is a really good reminder that barbecue continues to evolve, and it continues to grow, and it continues to change. And all of that is great. And we can celebrate all of that, but we still have to remember where we came from and why we're here. And that is what you find in Lockhart.
Yeah, definitely. It's always a place that anybody who says they're going to Texas, I always tell them to visit, because it's incredibly important. And it's a chance to step back in time, essentially. It really,
when you drive through it, it feels as if you have stepped back in
like little movie, like a movie set, or it doesn't like a little like Mayberry. It definitely feels that way. And there's, of course, Lockhart itself has grown. I did a screenshot. You guys have Wednesday is steak night and kids eat free night?
Kids eat free. Yep.
Okay. Thursday is Tex-Mex Thursday, right?
Tex-Mex Thursday. So it kind of revolves. It's not always the same dish. This week we're doing enchiladas. We're trying to establish like our core 4 or 5 dishes, and then those will be what we rotate through so that people can develop a familiarity with what the specials are going to be. And then on Tuesdays we do $30 whole racks of ribs from 5 to 9, which is a really great deal. And we don't have any specials on Friday and Saturday because we're pretty busy, but we also offer burn-ins. So we took burn-ins off of our regular menu, but we do offer burn-ins on Saturday and Sunday.
Okay.
So that's important, because a lot of people come in wondering when they can get burn-ins. Saturday and Sunday at Spring Branch.
And as I had indicated last episode, you guys do whole hog every day.
We do whole hog every day, yes.
Yeah, which is that's a thing.
It's a thing, and
it's very much a thing.
It's definitely been part of Patrick's like whole persona. He really started out. We developed relationships with Rodney Scott many years ago, partly because of Southern Smoke. We got to help him out, but it's been this obsession and fascination of Patrick's because we're in the beef capital where brisket is king. And it was kind of like, how do you do something not only that just differentiates you, but also when beef is so expensive, what else can you do that's going to really wow people? And that's when we started looking to whole hog. And it's still, it's an evolving customer base. We're still in the beef capital. So we have to work hard to get people to like want to embrace whole hog, but I think we're definitely getting there. For
Thanksgiving, are you going to in October? Are they is it controlled by Goldbelly? Is that when they'll put it online, that Thanksgiving packages?
The nationwide shipping stuff is going to be controlled by Goldbelly, yes. And I'm not sure what their timing is exactly, but I would expect that sometime after Halloween is when they'll kind of target the PR and announcements and stuff. I don't know that all for sure. But we do also we've always done local Thanksgiving options. So we'll have packages and offerings for local pickup, and we do hot turkeys and hot spiral cut rum glazed hams on Thanksgiving Day. So we're not open to the public as a restaurant, but we are open for pickups because we serve turkey and ham straight off of the smoker.
Gotcha. And so will that be something?
Those do sell out. Yeah. So those do sell out. So it's not something you could just walk up and order the morning of. Like, you definitely have to order it ahead of time. But we are doing that this year.
Do you roughly what time of year do you guys usually put those on sale? Do you remember for last year? Was it like
November 1? Yeah. Okay. It's like Halloween is over. We cross that off on the calendar. And then the next day is just like, all right, launch Thanksgiving. Give people we like to give people as much time as possible. So we open up the order site on at the very beginning of November. And then we kind of amp up the marketing push because we want to give people a little holiday breather. Like, we'll give you a couple days before we really put Thanksgiving, in your face. But then we really quickly ramp up all the marketing Thanksgiving's our biggest holiday. November is my craziest, busiest, most satisfying month of the year.
Okay. So I should text you a lot and ask you a lot of questions during that month.
Yes.
That's when you'll be the most accessible, right?
I will be very responsive and you will hear from me immediately.
That's great. No, it's interesting for people to get some insight. And then also too, maybe for 20 years from now, if you look back on this, you could see like a time capsule of how you were thinking and like what were the stresses then and what are the stresses 20 years from now. But this has been such a cool episode, and I'm glad we got to cover some Feges stuff, but Jordan was a pretty special
She
guest.
was great.
Yeah.
I agree.
Definitely. And it's so insightful, and it's interesting to see someone that has like such a big brand and have done so much career-wise, but also she's such a wonderful, kind human, and that's special. So